You're now live.
Live, okay. So today we're going to continue our work on H360. Yesterday, we spent a great deal of time hearing from the CUDs. Today, we are going to hear from the ISP providers. And so we will start with Leslie Nolte from Mansfield Community. I'm looking for, there's Leslie.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thank you so much, and thank you for this opportunity to address the committee.
Leslie, before you start,
Sure.
for everybody, we had a proposal brought to us yesterday, day before, about subsidies and putting some of the ARPA money into subsidizing rates for people, of a certain income level so that they can get signed up. The theory being running the line by the house doesn't do any good if people aren't hooked on. We know the major for-profit carriers have been doing that. The proposal is that we would phase out the state subsidy and that the ISPs would be required to provide a subsidy with a cost not more than $25 a month for low income. I think our question in the theory was, you'd pick up the customers and it would offset your cost. That may be true if you're large. What we're looking for is that something that would work for you? What would it do to your projections? We asked the CUDs the same thing. So just it's something we didn't get to you in advance because it was just brought to us, but think about that. And if you don't have it today, just send us any response and we'll take that into consideration as we work through this very small and simple bill.
I'll be happy to address that at some point. We are confined to 10 minutes, so there really is quite a lot to cover. I'll do my best to reference that. For some of the people present who are not familiar with me, my husband and partner, Tim Nolte, and Mansfield Fiber, I'd like to take a little moment just to give our history and talk about what we're doing now. Tim was the original builder of Burlington Telecom, designing and building and implementing that network. He and I then went on to work with EC Fiber and ValleyNet, and we were the initial organizers, developers, builders, and managers of that project from 2007 until 2014. We were doing an hour each way commute, not to mention all those evening meetings when you're doing a community organizing effort. And we kind of, EC Fiber had reached a level of maturity where they were about to close on conventional municipal bond banking. And so we came back to the Northwest, to Jericho, and started looking at what to do here. Initially, we thought about reactivating a proto CUD that had existed many years before between Jericho, Underhill, and Westford. But in the end, we decided not to go that route because we felt that the need was dire for broadband, and we knew how long it would take to work through that kind of structure. And so we just created a simple, socially responsible, community-oriented business. The business was organized in 2016. We connected our first customers in 2017, and we've been building fiber to the home since then. And we now have service in Underhill, Cambridge, rural areas. We only go where people are unserved or underserved. In Underhill, Cambridge, Fletcher, and Fairfax. We have only used our own equity and loans. Well, we've got a small amount of grants, but like EC Fiber, they're really a minimal part of our financing. So what I'd like to stress is that you are talking with someone who really has boots on the ground and has been through and over all the potholes and headaches and unforeseen complications of building a state-of-the-art fiber optic broadband network in rural Vermont. I'd like to speak to the two pieces of legislation you have before you and this flood of possibly $1 billion that's about to hit Vermont for broadband. With some notes of caution and some ideas that I hope you will look at to improve the current legislative proposals. When we all look at that potentially $1 billion for rural broadband, we have stars in our eyes, and it's mesmerizing and hopeful. But there are sharks in the water who will smell blood. And we have, unfortunately, some bad history in the state of Vermont when it comes to quote unquote free money. We are concerned that the CUDs, the legislators, and indeed the state of Vermont is at risk of looking at another J-Peak EB5 scandal to the extent that we put undue reliance on grants. So I'd now like to walk very quickly through some suggestions to improve the current legislation. 360 has a disproportionate, in fact, overwhelming proportion of anticipated funding to be distributed in the form of grants. In contrast, as we understood it, S118 from Senator Brock, Sorotkin, and others anticipates loans. We believe that your legislation should emphasize loans and not grants for a number of very, very important reasons. That is the best way to assure careful management, responsible management, prudent use of the available funds. The loans enforce a discipline on both the borrower and the lender to choose the best future-proof technologies and to embrace cost control. They also enforce a discipline to deploy that infrastructure and connect customers as quickly as possible. When you're talking broadband, you can expect from the time you initiate your design and engineering expenses to the time you get $1 in revenue can be 4 to 5 years. And so you want to move your deployment, you want to be in a situation to deploy quickly, as much as feasible, and to get your customers on board so that you're not sitting there running up working capital, unfunded working capital expenses. Grants, in contrast, absolve both the grantor and the grantee from taking due care. They're very difficult to discipline. If you're trying to sort of attempt to assure that those grants were spent correctly after the fact, it places a huge burden on already overworked state employees. The second thing I would say with respect to the proposed legislation is you must adopt a standard for broadband for any funded project of 100 megabits per second symmetrical service. The current 25.3 is absolutely obsolete. We have had customers calling us from areas that are quote unquote served by 25.3 where we do not and will not deploy, which we try to avoid because we want to use our scarce resources for people who truly underserved. And they are complaining. They are beside themselves. It's non-functional for any kind of remote working, for Zoom calls, for remote study, and certainly for telemedicine. So this is not a future-proof standard and should not be part of any legislation. Third, broadband expansion into rural Vermont is a difficult, time-consuming, and fraught undertaking. To my way of thinking, it should require all hands on deck. 360 restricts the proposed funding to one category of providers, community utility districts, and it leaves aside those of us, like many in this room on this call today, who are actually doing the hard work right now and connecting customers, and who have pole licenses for future expansion during the coming construction period. And if you're looking to the future and you want to move quickly, it's hard to understand why we would exclude people who know how to get the job done. It's really not sufficient to say, oh, well, all you have to do is simply sign a contract with the CUD. These are very, very young institutions. Some of them are less than a year old. They do not have well-formed administrative systems. They do not have well-formed governance systems. Many of them do not have robust technical experience inside their own organizations. They are at a very serious disadvantage when it will come to trying to negotiate a contract with large corporations. They won't have a way of evaluating the kind of proposals that are being put to them. They simply don't have the means right now. And the money is going to come into Vermont, as I understand it, long before these institutions have even moved up to the next step of maturity. So again, we want to protect them and support them. And we don't want CUDs, like the rest of the state, to be vulnerable to potential bad actors who might yet again, create more empty spaces as we have in downtown Newport, downtown Burlington right now, and take the money and run, as it were. The final concern we have is why the notion of putting money into a recreation of the failed Vermont Telecom Authority. When we were starting EC Fiber, we had a lot of dealings with the Vermont Telecom Authority. And I can tell you at that time, they poo-pooed EC Fiber's business plan at first, and then successively, actively undermined it by going out to EC Fiber towns and essentially dissing the EC Fiber program. And here we are today. EC Fiber is the role model for this legislation. So I think we have to be very cautious about that. We have institutions in Vermont who now have experience prudently managing broadband funds. And I refer specifically to VITA, Mascoma Bank, Northfield Savings Bank, who I know have worked with EC Fiber and ValleyNet. And there may be other local banks that are interested and capable of supporting this kind of effort. All banks have a unit that is set aside simply to administer loans. They are experts in managing this prudently for modest fees. And I would urge you to consider, I'd urge the legislature to consider looking to existing resources that have the know-how and the capacity to do the necessary work, both with respect to deployment and with respect to prudent management of funds. So with respect to the question, the affordability question, if I may have another moment, I should tell you that we have concluded a contract with the town of Fletcher, where we have built and are serving customers over nearly 18 miles of fiber optic network. We've concluded an agreement with the town to fully build out the entire rest of the town. And as part of that agreement, we have agreed to set aside 10% of operating profits to be devoted to a fund to be managed by the town to support town citizens who, for one reason or another, find themselves unable to afford the service. I would offer one bit of caution here. Most people don't really know what they're spending on internet plus phone plus their satellite TV, which has now become extremely expensive. And we have our customers telling us that they are actually saving money when they purchase those three services from us compared to what they were paying before they subscribed for our services. So it's very difficult to compare or assess affordability. I think in principle, it's an excellent idea to subsidize those who are truly in need. I think you will also find that many of those households also need help. They may not have a computer in the home. They may not know how to use a computer. Their school kids will if they have kids at home. But certainly we know we're an aging population, and we may find that there are many people who need some additional support and education to make the most of any new services that come to them. So I will now hand the floor over to my colleagues and be happy to answer any follow-up questions that the committee may have.
Any questions for Ms. Nolte? Senator Sirotkin and then Senator Pearson.
Thank you, Leslie. That was very helpful. Some real basic questions. Sorry if I'm taking up committee time, but how do you do what the big corporations say is impossible to do?
Well, we have a few secret sauces that I can't share publicly. At EC Fiber, we are able to operate at lower cost, both at Mansfield Fiber and Valiant at EC Fiber. Our costs are lower than investor-owned utilities. We don't have to answer to Wall Street. We don't have to maximize profits. We're happy with a modest return on investment. We know how to hire and train internally the kind of personnel that a large corporation would never even give a look at. We have hired young people straight out of high school and trained them to become the now chief technical officer at Valiant for EC Fiber. This was a young man who, when we found him, was stocking shelves and operating the POS system in a local grocery store. And we were able to find the right training. We had a CTO at the time who mentored him and trained him, showed him what courses to take, and he's now running the show for EC Fiber. This can be done. It's an unorthodox way of approaching personnel and workforce development, but we've done it successfully. We're doing it now and it works.
So a follow-up question along similar lines is, did you participate in the House discussion at all? Were you a witness there?
We did.
Do you have a theory as to why they excluded you from their bill?
I don't have a theory, but I will say this. I don't think, Tim Brooklyn, for example, is an EC Fiber customer. And but he was not around when we were building it from the ground up. And I feel there's a lack of understanding and appreciation of the history of EC fiber and what makes it different from the new CUDs. If you want me to take the time now to explain that, I'd be happy to do so, but I know you're short of time. But there were a lot of conditions and history behind EC fiber that made it have a different trajectory than the new CUDs. And they were just looking at, you know, a full-blown mature entity without understanding what the stages of from fetal to infant to adolescent to young adult to full maturity. They've had no knowledge of that. They don't appreciate it. We've lived it. We know what's involved. We know how much energy, time, people commitments, skills, prior experience you need to make that a success. And so that's a really huge difference.
Okay,
Okay,
thank you.
Senator Pearson, you had a question?
Yeah, thank you. Nice to see you, Leslie.
Hi.
I'm speaking to you through Burlington Telecom. They tell me I was the first customer north of Pearl Street to sign up. So I was involved in some of that effort around the ballot questions. Been watching this issue closely. And for what it's worth, Chair Briglin told me point blank that one of the areas they didn't have enough time and urged us to pick up was how to work with the small telecoms that we already have. So I don't think they blew through that with blindfolders on. I think there is a need. They recognize a need to deal with that. But I want to ask about these two things that you've hinged together, or that in my mind hinge together, that are important. One is sort of accountability. And that seemed to be what I heard the reason why it's accountability, and it's also a hunger, let's say, as why I hear you advocating for loans and not grants. And then when you fold in the CUDs, I think to me, there's a package here that does make sense. And there's a fact that I'm not sure you're accounting for. The ARPA money cannot be loaned. If it's a loan, it has to be coming back. We have to spend it in 3 years. It's not a get it back over 10 years kind of situation, which I actually agree with you is not ideal. So we're left to be in a situation where this federal money is a grant. And then you have this accountability problem. And I believe that one of the logic behind working in the House proposal virtually exclusively with the CUDs was that there is at least local accountability. There is never the profit motive. There is, more of a public structure. And so given that it can't be a loan, does that change the thinking, or how would you have us move forward? I'm assuming you're not saying don't ever work with a CUD, but I heard you say
I think, yeah.
Open it up more broadly.
I mean, what I'm concerned about is we don't want them, all those who want to support CUDs also don't want them to fail.
Right.
So there are a number of ways we can think about this. I haven't read the federal restrictions on the funds, but one of the things that could happen is that a grant, hypothetically, could be structured to be used as a loan loss reserve for commercial funding, commercial lending through any of these entities. Could be our the local banks or Vita. If Vita feels this is too big a lift for them, if you're looking like hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe they don't feel they're quite up to it, but certainly other banks might be willing to accept a grant targeted to be a loan loss reserve. But just shoveling millions and millions, if not tens and hundreds of $1,000,000 out to buying fiber, or, is going to be a big mistake. If nobody's watching how much I'm paying for fiber, why should I go out and try to get a good deal? Or if nobody's watching how much my consultant is charging me, or the correctness of the consultant's business plan, why should I care? We had this, I will give you counter instances, cautionary flashing lights. When the Rural Electrical Administration was founded as part of the New Deal, all that money went out as loans. When we went to the US Department of Agriculture, following the Obama ARRA grant program, and spoke to them about some what we believe to be bad use of some of those funds, the answer from the guy in charge at USDA, we asked, did you do any due diligence on the grantee and the proposal? And the answer was, and this is a quote, why should we do any due diligence? It's a grant. It's a very, very dangerous vehicle if you really want results. If you want results at a good price.
Well, so
Now, and the other thing I would say is the question of accountability. At EC Fiber, we felt that the members of the EC Fiber, as we were organizing it, these were committees that had worked for many years to try to get first dial-up and then wireless when dial-up was no longer any good, had worked together, and they had a track record as individuals of having worked on this, having negotiated with providers. So they were already embedded in that activity. Then when EC Fiber couldn't get anything through the Recovery Act, we launched what now is called crowdfunding. It didn't even have a name then. And we raised $7 million from local citizens. These were mostly middle-income people. The wealthy people did not participate. I want to correct that misstatement that's going around. And that really made you accountable. When your neighbors had loaned you money and you owed it back to them at a hefty interest rate, because it was high risk, it was a new startup company, you are really accountable. When you've just been appointed to a committee, what really is your accountability? I'm not sure what the accountability process is right now with those CUDs.
What happens if they
I mean,
go away?
if they misuse the funds, what's the consequence? Oh, you're no longer on the committee? I mean, we have to think about these things. I really feel that there is so much money about to hit Vermont. Let's be responsible, please.
Well, I think we share that. There clearly can be grants that are accountable, though, right? I mean, not every grant. I mean, that's on us to structure it well. I totally I like the idea of a reserve. I think that makes sense. Is there any wisdom to the state just buying reams of fiber and giving that out as opposed to money?
No. First of all, every network and every segment of a network has to be custom engineered. And I'll give you another area of concern. There are consulting firms that have done lots of great fiber work building middle mile networks. When you're talking about a fiber to the home last mile network, It's an entirely different animal. It requires a much more complex, much more detailed level of engineering. And that means how many fibers on this road and how many fibers on that road, and all kinds of other complicated questions we can't go into here. And I can tell you right now that our CUDs really don't understand this. And I know it because I've looked at some of the press releases they've issued when they've, if I must give an example, the Central Vermont CUD issued a press release when they had been allocated 48 fibers from Velco and Washington Electric from their transmission cables. And I got to tell you, you can't use that for backhaul. 48 count fiber is what you use for a small lateral road. They don't know. And it's not, right. It's not, they don't know what they don't know. And I don't know how you fill that gap, except the vehicle that we think would work is a loan program, because then you've got to have a business plan that will assure that that loan can be repaid. That's accountability. If you've only got grant money to work with, we as the state only have grant money to work with, let's make that grant available as a loan loss reserve or as a down payment towards a loan, but not to any kind of direct deployment, because we need a disciplinary mechanism that keeps all of us honest.
Okay, I'm going to have to move this along
Yeah,
because
sure.
Senator Brock has a question. I think you have given us more than enough to think about.
I'm sorry, I'm just trying
And if
to
we
answer
ever do
your
this
question.
again, I'll have you before we have the CUDs in. And Senator Bray, I see you. Okay, Senator Brock, you're muted, Senator.
Two questions I hope can be brief. The first question is, we know that we can't do loans, at least according to what we've learned about federal guidance. What about equity? Can you envision, for example, a telecommunications or a community broadband authority taking equity position in a project or in an operating entity for a project, and then being in effect paid back by dividends from the project that could be used for other purposes to support other broadband? So that's question one. Have you thought about that at all?
No, and I would like an opportunity to respond in writing, because it does take some thinking when you're setting up, complex financing and contractual relationship. I'd rather respond in writing in a thoughtful way, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah, that's fine. And I would think that one of the things you might think about is the issue of, if this were an investor-owned utility, the investors would be doing the due diligence before applying their money as equity. And I'm looking at something similar to that. So that's question one. Question two is, the CUDs who have appeared before us have almost universally said it's going to be 4 or 5 years, maybe longer, before the last mile is reached. What do you tell people in the meantime? Should there be an interim strategy for broadband now?
I don't think they're really, unfortunately, given what people need right now, I believe over the last year, Vermont tried that by putting up Wi-Fi hotspots. Wi-Fi hotspots don't work.
They don't work.
No,
they're not the answer.
That's right. There are no cheap and dirty solutions, unfortunately. I mean,
What about fixed wireless? What about fixed wireless?
It doesn't work. This is you need line of sight. We tested this at EC Fiber. We could not, we had what we thought visually was a line of sight, to use fixed wireless to accelerate.
Mhm.
Didn't work. We have one place in MC Fiber where we're using it in a very restricted way, where we have an open field, a farmer's field, and he's got a transmission point. He's taking our fiber to the home, and we boost that through a fixed wireless connection to a house that they rent at the other side of the field. So there are some kind of very restricted local circumstances where it's going to work. But as a general solution, this is forested land with winding valleys. It's not a workable solution. We should find out from VTEL how many customers they actually have on their fixed wireless network, which cost the taxpayers of the United States over $100 million. Divide that by the number of customers they have, and that will give you a sense of whether that's a good solution or not, a cost-effective solution. I think we know the answer. But I think what I would say in general is that there are going to be a number of financing structures that we could get creative about in Vermont to make good use of this funds that would also embody discipline and accountability. What I don't know is how that's going to fit in with some of the other aspects of your proposal, which is really rather complicated, having a new public entity, and that public entity would do X, Y, and Z, and it would, we'd need to think about that, and we will get back to you.
Great, thank you.
Get back to the committee.
Okay. Senator Bray. There you are.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair.
Oh.
Thanks, Ms. Nolte, for the analysis and sharing your thoughts, particularly around the discipline that comes with owing money as opposed to just being granted money, and the accountability that comes along with it. This is really sort of a question for the committee to just put on the table for us to investigate, since we're all learning about what the rules of the road are for the rescue plan dollars. Final guidance isn't out till May, and I'm just wondering if there's some opportunity to explore either what Senator Brock was just proposing, or that money might be swapped in to other obligations, releasing general fund dollars that are less constrained, that could be used as a loan as opposed to just a grant. So I don't know the answer. I just wanted to put it on the table for looking into.
I think that's on my list. Could we do a loan that could be turned into a grant if certain criteria happened?
Right.
Yeah, this is how we're going to spend next week, committee, going over key decision points we're going to have to make as we work our way through this. So,
thank you.
Okay, Leslie, and then we're going to move on.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm just trying to be responsive to the committee, but one other idea I have. If the final regs from the feds are not due out until May, I have been in contact, because we have a long-standing relationship with Senator Leahy's staff on these issues. I think Senator Leahy may have a way to be responsive to our concerns if we convey them to him. I just suggest that as another path that you might want to explore.
Okay. Senator Bray.
Yeah, just a quick, not that we need any more complexity, but the straight up broadband infrastructure bill that's probably due out of Congress in October could also end up serving sort of like a waterfall, where funds from there displace ARPA funds, which displace general fund dollars, or vice versa. So how we manage this large pools of money in flux with rules still pending is going to take a lot of creativity, I think, in the next year. the good news is that we have money to be creative with.
Absolutely.
Nice change. Okay, I'm going to move on to Roger Nishi.
Madam Chair, if we could start off with Kim Gates first, that would be great.
Okay, that would be fine. Where's Kim? There you are.
Good
Welcome.
afternoon. Thank you, everybody, for this opportunity to talk to you. I'm Kimberly Gates, and I am the manager of Franklin Telephone Company. And I'm here on behalf of the independent telephone companies, but my testimony will focus more on Franklin Telephones because that's what I do every day. Franklin Telephone's a family-owned business. It was started by my great-grandfather 120 years ago, and we serve parts of Franklin, Highgate, and Sheldon. I'm the manager and part owner along with my sisters and my parents, and I do a little bit of everything: accounting, regulatory, tech support. I'm a CO tech. I design the fiber projects. I oversee builds. This morning I was out manning the fiber reel, flagger and gopher. So I do a little bit of everything. I wanted to start and tell you a little bit about last year, because I think, you know, being a one-year anniversary, it's important to put it in perspective what the companies went through. So, you know, the pandemic was declared March 20th. We, Franklin Telephone, installed a hotspot on the church at our expense. On the 24th of March, the governor issued a stay home, stay safe order. The next day, on March 25th, we began a construction project that had not been scheduled for last year at all. It was a build that was 2.2 miles for 5 customers, and it was started with the customer reaching out to us that they needed to work remotely from home, and there was no way I could improve the copper plant. So we went to fiber. My daughter was home from Castleton University doing remote learning, and so she got to be a flagger on the job, and my husband and my cousin are the crew, and I was out there too. It was all hands on deck. And that started our marathon of fiber construction last year, just trying to meet the remote learning and the working from home needs of our customers. These are our customers, these are our neighbors. That's what we do. September 22nd, we were approved for a CARES grant. So September 22nd is not a great construction start season, but we were approved. So the grant was for 24 customers, hit 9 roads, 4.25 miles. We spent over $65,000, and the grant covered about $45,000. In December, we completed our build. All customers completed, and we were the first to submit the completed paperwork to the department. And we were exhausted. It was a busy year. This year, we've started construction already. Our first project started when we got a break in the weather a couple weeks ago. And this is the first project for the year. It was a 1/2 mile fiber build through the woods for 2 customers. So what that means through the woods is it's all ladder work except for 2 poles. So they have to lug the ladder in, climb to the top, move the 40-pound lasher from one side to the other, climb down, move the ladder continuously. And those are the types of jobs that we have scheduled for this year. Today we just finished this week's project of lashing up 1/2 mile of fiber. No, sorry, it's 3/4 mile of fiber for 5 customers. These are the end mile jobs, and they're difficult, they're expensive, and they're time consuming, and they cost a lot of money. The other thing I want to point out is everybody wants fiber, but nobody wants to pay for increased bandwidth. And so of our fiber customers, 17% take the same package they get on copper. So, eventually they'll need it and it's built and we want it there. But you need to understand, especially with any business models, don't think that you're going to run down the road with fiber and everybody's going to jump on and take the higher bandwidth. People are careful with their money. It's difficult times. And so if what works for them works, they're not going to pay for a higher package. If they are, have them move to Franklin. We'd love to have them up here. We're building fiber now. We could build more with funding and more hours in a day. We provide broadband and telephone to the last mile. And that's our commitment as a carrier of last resort. We use our investment wisely. So sometimes we put a remote up instead of fiber. Fiber is the end game, but realistically, if you can put a remote up and serve 40 customers with much better speeds, they have VDSL speeds, you can do 50-50 on it, or I think you can do even higher, but depending on distance and stuff, that gets you, it gets you out closer to the customer until you can get the fiber out. The whole job is just prioritizing all day, and all day is how do you meet the most customer needs. We're accountable. We do a ton of federal reports, locations, what speeds, how many people take packages, our financial stability, their state obligations. We're carrier of last resort. You build a house in my service area, I serve you. That's carrier of last result. And it's expensive, and that's our obligation, and we are glad to meet that. We have the expertise to plan, build, operate, and maintain. We don't need funds for a business plan. We need money to continue building those last miles. They're expensive. We use, I'm going to throw a couple things at you. We use USAC NLAD. So what that stands for is Universal Service Administration Company. So it's a federal USAC. And NLAD is a National Lifeline Accountability Database. So there's this federal database. If a customer is low income, they can apply, and it gives them a reduction on their phone bill for phone and internet service. Vermont used to administer the program, and there were a lot of technical issues. The lists weren't very current and updated, and it was a nightmare to verify who actually qualified for assistance with their bill and who didn't. The national program, there's a few tweaks I'd love to make to it, but for the most part, it works really well to have that national database. Next thing I want to say is we're community-based. We've been in our neighborhood for 120 years. And we do a lot of things without thinking about it or mentioning about it, but sometimes, we have to. So I was looking back last year, some of the projects, besides doing all the bills, we tried to be very generous. We did a donation to a local food shelf. We did a donation to the nonprofit elderly housing that was having financial difficulties due to the pandemic. And then the other project that we took on last year is Franklin Central School is an elementary school that is, I think it's called preschool. They keep changing the name of it, but preschool through 6th grade. And basically we reached out to the school and we said, we know it's going to be a difficult school year, the challenges of the hybrid model and back in the classroom and spacing. So we want to give each of your teachers $750 each for supplies to help you make it easier for the teachers and the students in the classroom. And they were pretty thrilled with it, and we were just trying to do our part because we're their neighbors. This is what we do. We're an established business. We continue to build fiber to the home, but we need legislative support to continue more broadband builds to all locations. The legislation needs to be competitively neutral. And Franklin's got a 120-year history serving our community, doing fiber builds, and we should qualify for funding without going through another entity. I thought the department grant system, that was the first time we'd ever received a grant, and I thought that worked very well. And I'm just going to end with it, that Vermont wants to get it right. And the independents like Franklin Telephone are part of the solution. And I would hope that the legislation can accommodate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Senator Hardy. And then Senator Brock. Senator Hardy.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ms. Gates, for your testimony. You did a lot of expensive, complicated builds for very few remote customers last year. How did you finance that? Did you access the state program, the state grants, or did you do loans, or how did you finance those builds?
We financed it internally. I did not access, I had the $45,000 grant. I spent a lot of money last year. It was not looking good in my checkbook, but we did not do loans. It was all internally funded.
So the grant you're referring to is through that Agency of Commerce and Community Development, the sort of business grant that most businesses were qualified for, is that right?
No, it was through the Vermont Department of Public Service. It was
The line extension program?
Yeah, it was.
no,
Yeah.
Get Vermont Connected Now initiative grant.
I see. Okay, got it. Okay.
And one of the things with that grant is we had applied in August, and there was a delay because they had to get approval from CUDs before they could distribute funding. So that delayed some of the approval process.
Okay. And what percentage of your area is served by fiber at this point of your service area?
I have less than 10 miles to go, but they're really tough 10 miles. I've got 2 customers that are half a mile, buried copper, no conduit. That's a tough pill to swallow. So all the jobs this year are less than 5 or 6 customers a mile. And even when I build down there, they don't all want the higher speed because they don't want to pay the $11 more a month.
So what are your monthly for broadband service or internet?
So we offer, we have a slew of things, but 10.1 is our basic offering. And for the most part, people get that. There's a few little spots that they might only be getting like 8.1. That's $38.95 a month. And then the fiber package, which is 25 and 10 for speeds, that's $49.95 a month. And 50/25, I believe, is $69.95 a month.
And the federal program that you referenced with all the letters in its name, that is a program for subsidized rates for lower income customers. Is that correct?
That is correct. So there's, if you go to the usac.org,
Okay.
There's a link called Lifeline, and they have, you can get lost in all the links, but there's a link of how do I qualify? And it's based on income, and it's based on if you qualify for different things like this 3 square.
Right. The 3 squares Vermont. Yep.
Yeah. They've changed it slightly, so I have to look, but the income qualifier is a big, if you get housing assistance, that's one of the things. It's an online thing that takes a couple minutes to do.
Okay, it's the Lifeline. I've heard of the Lifeline I know about that, so I wasn't sure if that was the same thing or if it was a different program. Okay, great.
Yeah, and they're hoping to link that to a new emergency broadband. I think Roger's going to speak on that one a little bit, but.
Great, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Senator Brock, you had a question?
Just some of my question has already been answered. I think, Kim, a few minutes ago. You've effectively, though, extended fiber virtually throughout your entire territory on a dime. I wonder, as you compare what you've been hearing of proposals around. Do you have any reaction as to, why doesn't everybody do what you were able to do?
Maybe they're smarter than me. It's a lot of work, and it's by passion, and it's just difficult. I don't have a good answer for you. So.
The amount of money that you are having to charge, you have some relatively fast service that's currently available. Is it correct that there's just a very small percentage of the population that buys that?
That buys the fiber?
That buys the higher speed?
Oh, it's, yeah, to the top package of fiber is 15 or 16%. So more of my fiber customers take the cheap package the same as copper than they do the top package.
Is the argument that you hear from the customers that they can't afford it on the one hand, or is the argument that they just don't need the higher speed?
They don't need the higher speed, and they don't want to spend the money on it. And one of our projects this winter was we can actually graph customer usage, and very few people needed the next package up. They were, there's some customers on 10.1 that were like, those definitely need to be on the fiber list. But for the most part, the 2510 packages, the customers are using, they're fine in that package.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Donald. Sandra, you're muted. Cowsate your microphone.
This has been very, very helpful, and the witnesses has probably have more experience than most people in this business, if it's just family experience from long ago, and a lot of family grit, I think, has gone into it. Ms. Nolte talked about combining services. Do you have contracts with like TV, former satellite TV services? And do you sell those?
I think the question is, do I do satellite TV services?
But the Noltes said that when you combine broadband, telephone, and the packages of movies and stuff that you get, then when you combine all those, you bring your rates down. Have you experimented in that area, or is that something you're still looking ahead to?
Well, the TV service is an over the top that I don't get. It's not part of anything I do. It's a Netflix or a Hulu or YouTube TV. You just sign up on your own and you do it over the internet. So I don't see any of that. I am aware of a lot of customers going to those types of devices and not having their satellite TV anymore. And the 10.1, typically you can do 3 TV devices, unless they're an HD TV, you can do 3 devices well. The mix-up people get is sometimes the broadband connection is fine. It's the Wi-Fi that's an issue.
Madam Chair, the witness is certainly not typical of the industry, and in the greater scheme of things, they would be sort of brushed aside if we. It would not be hard for them to be brushed aside. How can we structure our monies to support small projects that probably wouldn't be the first choice of investor-owned providers, in a way that recognizes them as a unique entity? And separates investor-owned utilities that are larger in scale, and where the stockholders, rather than send the money in grants to local neighborhood schools, ship it off to stockholders. How could you help us carve out a policy that recognizes the different services that you provide with services that others provide differently? Got any
Better
advice
to-
for us?
It might be better to give her some time to think about that.
Well, I would not expect that there wouldn't be a lot of time devoted to that, and it's probably daily. But no one on this committee wants to shut down small community services, but we are worried about shipping money to for-profits that have.
Don't speak in we, Senator, until it has been voted upon.
We share the interest in being precise about shipping monies to investor-owned utilities that have stockholders, and we have not come to a solution on that. And that's probably one of the most difficult things we're going to have to deal with. Madam Chair, that appreciate the witness's testimony, because it has put, this comes from people that have a longer experience than the Nulties, but have different challenges. So, thank you.
I would like to add that it's very difficult for me. I don't know if I can do this. There was legislation that was passed 25 years ago. Sorry.
Would it be easier if you just wrote or emailed it to us?
Yeah, I just want to say there was legislation that was passed 25 years ago that we sold Franklin Electric Light Company. And I don't want that to happen to Franklin Telephone. I do also want to mention, you had asked about the $25 customer broadband program. And I will have to talk to the other members, but I need some clarification of who would verify who's qualified, how long would it go, and what speeds are you putting into those programs?
Okay. And yeah, it sounds like your economics and your speed are, it is possible to get a very affordable program, just not at a higher speed. And I assume if we made you charge less to some people, and in your area, it may be a good percentage of your base, pay less, then somebody's going to have to pay a lot more. We're going to have to find a way of subsidizing that.
Right. And one thing that we do, I do a lot of things that I don't always make note of. One thing we do is we do have the economy package. We used to call it the dial-up package, which is 5 and 1, and we charge $19.95 a month. But for the customers that are on that, and we have about 15, they're typically senior citizens that are just checking email and a few things, and you can still stream at 5 and 1. And so it's sort of tucked away there. Not something we advertise very much, but.
Thank you. I think you point out the kind of Vermont family business that Vermont is proud of. And I wish we could duplicate you in a whole lot of towns. Senator Pearson, you have a question.
Yeah, I hope this committee will find a way to expand what the House did and only targeted CUDs. And I'm especially interested in helping small companies like yours. Is there any reason why or are you interested in expanding your territory? I mean, we've heard of the challenges for newcomers. Your track record seems proven. Are there federal rules, state rules, just your own interest, just the money, anything that would prevent you from potentially expanding beyond your current service area?
It's money.
So if the state gave you money, maybe.
I'd look at a few things that I had my eye on.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the work this past year. Roger Nishi, are you?
If we could go to Brian
Okay.
next, then I'll follow him.
No, I missed that first part. Who's next?
If we could go to Brian Martini next, and then I will.
Okay, Brian, you're up.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Brian Martini. I'm new to Vermont, so I'll keep it short. I'm the general manager for Topsom Telephone and Topsom Communications. I just started in January. I'm here to support my fellow independents, Roger and Kim, and anyone else is on here who's an independent company in the state of Vermont. I've worked successfully at Fisher's Island Telephone for the last almost 10 years, where we modernized the community and delivered high-speed internet to the community. So I come from small town areas, and I'm looking forward to doing more work here.
Brian, do you just cover Topsom?
It's Topsom, East Corinth, parts of Newberry, Bradford, Fairleigh, that area.
Okay. Pretty rural areas down there. I've had the privilege of getting lost looking for some town halls in my former occupation.
Well, that's how I get to work every day. I just kind of get lost.
Some pretty rural roads. Okay. Any questions, Brian? Newcomer to the state. Welcome.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Roger, is this your turn?
Yes, it's my turn.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for having me today, everyone on the committee. Waitsfield Telecom has been around, Waitsfield and Champlain Valley Telecom has been around for 117 years. And during these 117 years, we've been all about universal service and being the provider of last resort. We started out when there weren't, people were putting wires along fence lines. And we went to all the customers that wanted service then. We still do that today. It's Waitsfield and Champlain Valley Telecom's goal, as well as all the other independents, to continue to build out their networks and get the speeds to the customers that are needed and desired. The whole discussion in the House where they called the CUDs how they referred to them as unofficial providers of last resort. Well, we are official providers of last resort in the areas we serve, and at times it felt like we were being accused of not getting the job done. I can say that we've invested in our networks over and over and over the years, getting the most bang for our buck, starting out with lower speeds of DSL. And I know everyone wants to make fun of DSL and point out all of its shortcomings, but what we did was get the most bang for our buck and ensured is all the customers in our areas received 4.1 service. And then we upgraded ourselves to the next speed that the FCC said of 10.1. And in doing so, everyone was we were getting equitable service to all of our customers in the areas we serve. Now, if we would have immediately jumped to fiber, 50% of the company would have been in fiber, and the other 50% would be sitting there with dial-up speeds of probably less than 4.1. So what we've done is we've brought everyone along. Jumping to fiber, though, it's not using existing copper and moving remotes farther out in the field. It's completely rebuilding networks. And that's why, as you've seen and heard, it's very expensive, because we are building completely new networks with every fiber strand that we put out in the field. And that's where I'll come back to say that at Waitsfield and Champlain Valley Telecom, we've been putting in fiber now since an RUS broadband grant back in 2010. We started putting fiber in then. And with that grant, that actually jump-started our fiber development. It was a grant loan program through through RUS, in which it was 5.5 million in grant, and that was 70% of it, and the other 30% of it was a loan. More recently, we took part in the Vermont Connectivity Initiative, and we received $984,000 that allowed us to build to approximately 224 locations. And we did that in a short amount of time, much as Kim did. And we also took part in the LECAP program, and we built to 9 dwellings, and each received approximately $2,500 to help with their construction. So when grants are criticized, I say we're accountable. We know how much scrutiny we are in building broadband. We, as companies, we're going to go out and we're going to negotiate the best deals we can get. So when Leslie talks about us being at times possibly being irresponsible, I don't believe we are. We are going to do the best we can to get the best service to our customers.
I think Leslie's disagreeing with that.
That wasn't what I said.
I think there's a broad difference. You've been in business for 107 years, and the majority of our CUDs haven't been around for a year. So there is a lot of experiential difference in that area. I assume you know how to bargain for your raw materials.
Yes. And I will say then, and I apologize, Leslie, for jumping to that conclusion. I will say that, and I think this is sort of an unexpected result of what's happening, is I think when the whole discussions about CUDs was happening in the House, it was viewed as CUDs is going to do everything. They're going to start up a business and do everything. And now what you're hearing is they're talking to a lot of the incumbent providers or the providers in their area. So there is some experience being provided, but like I said, they're volunteers and they're learning as they go. But I do believe that they are trying to work with the experienced companies that are out there. And in fact, we're in discussions with CUDs and towns out there in ways that we can assist them. And to answer a question that I know has been asked over and over about public-private partnerships, we've just started referring to our dealings with the CUDs as we're working on operations agreements. They're agreements in which we can both help each other to build and provide services to the areas that they want to build to. Now, in that regard, in working with them, it's while working with them, I still believe that the monies need to be made available to more parties and those that can build to Vermont residents sooner than a CUD. It may be possible for a CUD to do. So when in what Senator Brock came up with on page 11 of S118 on line 5, the 8086 fund allocations, I think that's a good summary of where we should possibly look in providing funding to the various entities. And I'll give an example there. There may be a CUD aligned with entity A that wants to build in an area where there's already an incumbent provider, and they're not working with that incumbent provider. But that incumbent provider may have an area that they want to build to next year that the CUD with the other entity may not be able to get to for 4 or 5 years. I think that needs to be considered, and maybe that location and entity that is already providing service in the area should be allowed some funding to get customers better service. It's always looking at how can we get the customer better speeds and better services quicker? And you've heard me say this many times over and over, and Kim's going to yell at me later for bringing this up again. It's all a time and money equation. 10 years ago, when we were coming to you saying that we needed funding to help get the fiber networks built or improve our networks, there wasn't the money. And today, there's loads of money out there. We're trying to figure out what the rules are so to where we can use it to our advantage to get the best money possible. But now there isn't, from what we hear from everyone, there isn't time. Everyone needs better service now. And even though that's being said, we all do realize that for us to build out our networks, it's going to take 4 to 5 years or longer. Now, at Waitsfield and Champlain Valley Tel, 40% of our customers are on of our broadband customers are on fiber. The other 60%, we figure it's going to take another 4 or 5 years and another $60 to $65 million. Waitsfield, we over the years have been self-funding up to about $7 to $8 million per year to build out these networks, and at that pace, it could take much longer than the 5 to 6 years to get to all these customers. And that's where we believe grants are important. Grants help us, give us additional capital to build to our customers quicker. So if you say, if through a grant loan type partnership or a matching type of grant partnership, if we can get $3 million in 1 year, we would add that to the top of our budget and we would try to build to that many more customers. And in doing so, we would get the residents of Vermont their broadband speeds quicker than if we were doing it on our own. And that's why over time we do stress the importance of grants and how they can work. And different companies have different capital structures, and that's really where it comes into play. Some don't have the capacity to get additional loans, and that's where the grants are important. One thing I would like to add, Kim talked about all the things that we have done since the pandemic. All of the independents went out and we added hotspots. And we do realize that they're not the best educational tool out there, but they're out there if someone needs them. We built to customers that didn't have service. And one thing I'd like to point out in the call to action was get one of the calls was, can you get service to customers that don't have broadband service today so that they can, their kids can go to school, and can you do that at no charge? We're going on a year now and 3 months, and for those that we provided no charge services to at no charge, we've been carrying that, and it's never been discussed. So when there was a broadband arrearage program and other programs, those free services were never ever discussed, and if we could get funding for those in some form or fashion, in some form of the bill, that would be greatly appreciated, because we'll take that money and we'll invest it back in our networks in some form or fashion. We are all actively looking at our the affordability. Affordability is key, and making sure people can stay connected is key. The broadband program, Lifeline program from the state was very helpful in keeping people connected. The voice arrearage program was great in getting people connected. We do wish that the federal programs funded more, and that's where, when Kim mentioned the emergency broadband benefit program, which will provide $50 to people's bills, if the FCC could figure out a way to work that into the Lifeline program, we think it would be a great benefit to those that can't afford the service. But there are worries right now that the funding that's been made available may not last more than 3 months. And at the end of 3 months, then we're going to have to deal with having to figure out how we're going to sustain those customers. And I think what will happen is many of us will say, we're going to have to continue to service at no cost and try to figure out, working with you in the state, if there's a way to fund those lines through some type of program. And with that, I'll end my statements and take any questions that are available. But before I do that, I apologize, Leslie, for jumping to conclusions.
Senator McDonald has a question. Senator, you're
Muted.
Who's your ownership?
Roger, you're muted.
I'm muted now. Our ownership is we're still family owned. It's the Haskin family. And so we're still 100% Vermont family owned and operated.
So, Madam Chair, this is a second witness that has presented to us a history of ownership and service of communities. And it is different from if we had $100 to give away and we passed it out to investor-owned utilities based on the number of people they serve. These last two witnesses would be, I don't know if they get 10 or 1.5% of the money.
Senator, is this a question?
Yes,
Because we're
it is,
running
Madam
out of
Chair.
time.
Yes, it is, Madam Chair.
Okay.
Our dilemma is, how do we discriminate, which is what we do, between those companies that are accountable and work in their local communities and participate, and those who are been purchased by other companies that are not here and are interested in these grants with an effort to get as much money as they legally can by those grants to their
Senator,
stockholders.
I'm waiting for the question.
Yeah, I will get to it, Madam Chair.
Okay.
How do we discriminate in dealing with grants to meet our goals in this state? How would you suggest we do it to companies that meet our goals of getting the money out to local broadband versus giving it to companies that are apparently free to not use the money the way you and Franklin telephone companies would use
it? I think it's one where in what Senator Brock has come up with, he does say that small eligible telecommunications carriers as defined in section 227D of this title would be eligible for funding. Now that does go beyond Kim and Franklin Telephone and Waitsfield and Champlain Valley Telecom to others that are out-of-state companies that have other shareholders. But that does encompass the small telephone companies of Northfield, Perkinsville, Ludlow, Shoreham, and Topsom. Sorry, Brian.
to do the right thing, Madam Chair, to companies that we believe are doing what we would hope that they would do. It's a heck of a lot of money we have to spend to all the rest of the companies to treat them similarly. Maybe someone can tell us, is there a small company minimum? Like we had, Vermont gets a small state minimum grant to go, but these companies are
Getting
going
into committee discussion.
I think one thing that
Thank you, Madam Chair.
One thing that we could do is I think it's incumbent upon us as companies to actually make requests for funding based on where we believe the needs are and where we can get to the most customers possible. One of the concerns that I do have is under the current structure is that the entity that will be providing the funding is very CUD centric at this point in time in 360. And therefore, would they say, well, I have this CUD next to Waitsfield, let's give the money to them as opposed to Waitsfield. So there would need to be some guidelines there that say that they need to expand it and look at everything in an impartial way.
Madam Chair, that's helpful, but if it's not an issue of not giving money to, they're giving them the proposal to keep it to CUDs is we figure their goals are different than the proposal of giving it to the larger out-of-state companies. That's the problem. And these witnesses are stuck in the middle. And how how might we, and I'm getting into committee discussion, so I'll stop, but
Yep.
that's our challenge.
This committee has not made any decisions at this point. I've got several days backed up to do decisions, starting with goals. Senator Brock.
The only thing I was going to respond and answer to the senator's question is clear specifications, clear performance standards, and audit. That's how you confirm that the money is being used as intended. Very simple. Hard to do, but simple to articulate.
And that was, well, audit wasn't yesterday, but being very clear about expectations and goals was, no matter how we choose to monitor this. Okay.
Thank you,
Any
Senator
other
Brock.
questions? All right, if not, I'm going to move on to Michael Birnbaum. Senator Bray has a question. And committee, we have canceled one of our future witnesses at 3:15. We will take a break and then we're going to continue with this discussion because I think it's very helpful. So, Michael, the floor is yours. Wait, Senator Bray had a question. I apologize.
It's very short, just a comment. So I live in an area, a county with service from more than one company, one of which is Waitsfield Champlain Valley Telecom. And so I've been the beneficiary and seen many neighbors who they have a long history of working hard to help customers, well before we ever got into our broadband discussions lately. So, I'm just providing a customer testimonial, and there are people served by one of the other carriers who just, I'd say 20 plus year lament. They say, I wish I had the same service you had over there. So just weighing in, testifying.
Thank you.
I've had testimony. Okay. Michael Birnbaum.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee, for inviting me to speak. In the interest of keeping to my roughly 10 minutes, I prepared a statement.
We've expanded that because I think
I'm aware of that, but
very helpful.
I prepared a short enough statement so that I could hit the most important issue I think is facing us, which Senator McDonald, Senator Pearson, Senator Brock have all addressed today. So I'm going to read it to you and then I'll be glad to take questions. So my name is Michael Birnbaum and I'm the owner of Kingdom Fiber. I'm the co-owner of Cloud Alliance, co-owner of New Alliance, and Plainfield delegate to CV Fiber, CUD. I'm going to give you a quick thumbnail history of broadband in Vermont. Before the state, and I'm sure it's not perfect, but it's something I wrote this morning. Before the state jumped into the broadband arena, there was rudimentary internet from Adelphia and smaller cable cos, and early DSL from Verizon and smaller telcos, and companies like Sovereignnet, ValleyNet, and PowerShift. And this was confined to the denser village centers. The rest of Vermont was relegated to dial-up. Enter the WISPs. When the big companies refused to expand, local folks took matters into their own hands, forming community-based wireless internet service providers to serve those left behind. And though they amassed loyal, grateful subscribers, they mostly crowdfunded and they mostly remained quite modest in size. Governor Douglas and Tom Eveslin believed they had the solution back when they got the VTA off the ground. And I endorsed the VTA solution and testified on its behalf here in this committee and in Washington. I think the VTA got a lot of things right and a couple of things spectacularly wrong, and was hampered by its varied missions and political requirements. During the ARRA stimulus, the congressional delegation got fooled by an ambitious LTE fixed wireless proposal we all now know disappointed mightily. As a WISP, wireless ISP, I spoke out early against that solution. To me and the other Vermont WISPs, it was a wolf in sheep's clothing, a fixed wireless proposal looking to establish a mobile wireless service. Next came Governor Shumlin and members of the legislature who lost faith in the VTA, and the governor cast his hopes with the same USDA-funded wireless solution, and he pulled a Kissinger. He declared victory in the face of defeat. Under Governor Scott, the Connectivity Division of the Department of Public Service has done what it could, limited by severely constrained human and capital resources. And yes, there are structural issues of regulators supporting entrepreneurial things, but I do praise the department for its multiple positive contributions. Act 79 was a great achievement of the legislature, and now it is time to take a further step. So, why we still don't have universal broadband? It's easy to blame the private providers. After all, we all had our chances, didn't we? But it's really all about the money, just as Roger was saying. It's easy to say that private providers failed. I think that conclusion can fairly be applied to the national companies, but the same thing should not be applied to the smaller entities. It especially cannot be applied to the small ISPs. National cable cos and the Ma Bell telco have always been captive to the high return on investment requirements of their owners. Is that a good thing for society? In many respects, no, it is not. Small providers, be they independent telcos, cable cos, and ISPs, simply have lacked sufficient capital to move faster than they have. So, should we share in the blame? I say no, we should not. Enter the CUDs. Municipal broadband has had a checkered history throughout the country. There have been some ignominious failures and some great successes. EC Fiber, even with its extraordinarily fortunate relationship with nonprofit ValleyNet, did not fare particularly well in its early years. The VTA would not fund it because it considered ECF's business model really shaky. EC Fiber crowdfunded promissory notes, and in particular, a few wealthy individuals in the district got it off the ground. Yet it struggled to find its footing for a long time. EC Fiber's slow start cannot all be attributed to the municipal bond market collapse in the recession. But since transitioning from its initial multi-town interlocal agreement to become a municipality, though, ECF got it together and is a thrilling, glorious success. So what's the role for privates? The tide of Vermont broadband policy has swung mightily in favor of this CUD model. I really love the idea of CUDs, and that's why I've devoted the last 3 years to active participation in CV Fiber. It appeals to my progressive sensibilities. Will the EC Fiber model be replicated throughout Vermont? Yesterday's testimony suggests, excuse me, I lost my place. Oh, there it is. Suggests varied CUD strategies. None have the inherent advantages that EC Fiber did have years ago. Not all will go well, and we no longer have the luxury of a longer time horizon. The national providers soiled the bath, and now I fear that the political CUD tide is going to toss the independent, community-based providers out with the bathwater. This would be a huge mistake. If all the funding and gatekeeping is concentrated with the CUDs, there may be less attractive arrangements for those of us with a lot of expertise, experience, and desire to serve. The local community-based small providers may be forced to choose between poor business deals with CUDs or marginalization. And placing the state's faith in any one solution is unwise. Diversification always ameliorates risk. Remember, the principal problem has been lack of capital. Just like the privates, the CUDs have insufficient capital. Now that federal dollars are finally about to flow, for broadband expansion, both municipalities and private providers have the opportunity to explode with good results. It's time for real partnerships. And I know we were discussing partnerships yesterday. Not just subsidiary owner-vendor relationships such as operator agreements. A real partnership is when two or more parties pull in the same direction, pool resources, plan together, and execute the plan. Now, I'll just say a couple words about Kingdom Fiber. Kingdom Fiber seeks such partnerships. We are working especially closely with NEK Broadband. We expect to partner with them on the Concord project you heard about yesterday. We were the initiator of the idea that has resulted in Washington Electric Cooperative and construction of fiber on all its distribution poles. This is an enormous opportunity for WEC members and the providers that will serve them. In partnership with EC Fiber ValleyNet, we hope to further partner with CV Fiber and serve a good portion of its territory as well. And we also expect to serve some areas currently unrepresented by CUDs at all. Kingdom Fiber took enormous financial risk to compete with the big companies in the FCC's RDOF Phase 1 auction. This resulted in our winning support, second only to Consolidated Communications in Vermont. We won a considerable sum to be paid in small monthly increments over 10 years. However, this sum only covers about a quarter of the true cost to build out the extremely challenging rural territory. We are counting on finding grants and loans to augment this support to make our project a success. So here's a simple recommendation. I urge you to merge the best elements of S118 with H360, and nearly every improvement to the bills that I would suggest has been already mentioned by one or another witness. With more time, I would detail those suggestions to perhaps lend weight to others' arguments, but instead I chose today to emphasize the unintended consequence of tossing that bathwater before the community-based providers are given the opportunity to climb out of the basin. The bill that emerges from this committee should insert incentives for and eligibility of private providers to access the coming beneficial grant, loan, and property tax provisions commensurate with those of the CUDs, but not dependent on the CUD's endorsements. Because the national corporations already have the capital it would take, I recommend that these incentives should be limited to small community-based providers, small business definitions with limits on revenue and/or employees, such as those used by USDA or SBA or other agencies, could be utilized. And I'd be glad to take any questions.
Okay, committee, Senator Bray.
Thank you, Mr. Birnbaum. I have a question. We had a discussion earlier on about the balance of support in the form of loans versus grants. Can you offer some thoughts on that, please?
Yes, I'm glad to. I agree with the Nulties that loans impose a certain kind of discipline on the lender. But I disagree that grants are unable to. If grants systems are set up properly with protective provisions for the granting authority and for the community, such as performance standards, rate standards, auditing, and reversion provisions if the grantee fails to meet those standards, then grants can be very disciplined. The grantee will have to hew to the line, and it will work. And there are, as you've heard from a number of witnesses, there are some really challenging places to build to. It's really expensive. And that's the capital expenditure. You've also heard that not everyone's going to take the expensive plans, and the operating expenses are going to be really challenging as well. And grants can make up the difference. I don't think everyone has to get all grants, but I think grants are a really important piece of the solution.
Thanks very much.
Any other questions? Okay, up, Senator Hardy.
Just one quick question. Everybody moved. Mr. Birnbaum, thanks for your testimony. It sounds like it was written out, but did you submit it to?
I didn't, but I'll be happy to send it to Faith afterward.
Okay. And anyone else who had written testimony, it doesn't look like most of your testimonies are up there on our website yet.
I was still writing it just before the hearings.
Last minute writing your term paper. I get it.
Yeah.
This isn't health and welfare. We don't mandate written testimony. Okay, committee, it is 3:15 or a little after. We're going to take a 15-minute break. I think everyone could use a leg stretch, and I know I need to go open the window because it's getting very warm up here. So 15 minutes, be back, and we will continue this
Donald, you're
discussion.
muted.
Will the last
I'm-
witness be here when we come back from break?
Mr. Birnbaum, can you be with us at 3:30?
I'd be happy to.
Okay, thank you.
Ending